Ancient Egypt wasn't just about pyramids, mummies, and pharaohs. Behind the hieroglyphs and golden masks, Egyptians had sexual practices so bizarre, they'd make modern people blush beneath their sunscreen. These weren't just bedroom curiosities. They were deeply intertwined with religion, politics, and daily life in ways that shaped one of history's longest-lasting civilizations. From divine masturbation myths to gods with detachable glowing penises, you're about to discover why ancient Egyptian sexuality was as complex and fascinating as their monuments. What you'll learn comes from documented historical sources, temple carvings, papyri, and archaeological evidence that reveal a culture where sexuality wasn't hidden away, but celebrated as a divine force. The Egyptian creation myth begins with a god pleasuring himself. According to texts from the Pyramid Age, the universe began when Atum, the primordial deity, created himself from the chaotic waters of Nun. Alone in the cosmos, Atum masturbated, and from his ejaculation sprang the first divine couple, Shu and Tefnut, who would go on to create the rest of the gods and, eventually, humans. This wasn't some obscure myth. It was central to Egyptian cosmology, depicted on temple walls throughout the kingdom. At Karnak Temple, you can still see carvings showing Atum with hand on phallus, creating the universe through divine ejaculation. Egyptians didn't see this as obscene. They saw it as the ultimate creative act, the moment when nothingness transformed into existence. What's even more remarkable is that Egyptian pharaohs reenacted this creation myth as an official state ritual. During the annual inundation of the Nile, the flooding that made Egyptian agriculture possible, the pharaoh would perform a public masturbation ceremony at the river's edge. This wasn't some private royal kink. It was a crucial religious ceremony witnessed by priests and officials, recorded in temple inscriptions and observed by foreign visitors like Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus. The pharaoh's semen, like Atum's, was believed to possess divine creative power. By ejaculating into the Nile, the king magically ensured the river would flood to the proper level, bringing the fertile silt that made Egypt's agricultural miracle possible. If the Nile flooded too little, famine would follow. Too much, and villages would be destroyed. The pharaoh's masturbation ritual was literally responsible for the survival of the entire civilization. Archaeological evidence from sites like Luxor and Karnak shows special chambers where pharaohs would prepare for this ritual, with inscriptions detailing the precise religious formulas they would recite while performing the act. The Egyptian word for this ceremony, shadeh, appears in multiple royal texts, always connected to fertility and abundance. Imagine the pressure on these pharaohs. The entire kingdom was watching, expecting your divine masturbation to save the agricultural season. Talk about performance anxiety. No wonder pharaohs were considered living gods. They were expected to control the cosmos through their sexual potency. Death wasn't the end of pleasure for ancient Egyptians. Their elaborate afterlife included a fully functioning resurrected body, complete with all the sexual capabilities they enjoyed in life. The Egyptian Book of the Dead and tomb paintings show the deceased enjoying food, drink, and yes, sex, in the field of reeds, their version of paradise. This sexual afterlife begins with the myth of Osiris, Egypt's god of the dead. According to temple texts, Osiris was murdered by his brother Seth, who dismembered his body into 14 pieces and scattered them throughout Egypt. Osiris's wife Isis recovered 13 of these pieces, but couldn't find the 14th, his penis. Undeterred, Isis crafted a magical phallus for her dead husband, attached it to his reassembled body, and used it to conceive their son, Horus. This wasn't just a colorful story, it established the pattern for all Egyptian resurrection. The opening of the mouth ceremony performed on mummies had explicit sexual undertones. Priests would touch various parts of the mummy with specialized tools, symbolically reactivating their senses, including sexual function. The Egyptian word for this ceremony, wep-ir, has linguistic connections to words for sexual potency. Tomb paintings from the Valley of the Kings show the deceased engaging in sexual activities in the afterlife. The Turin erotic papyrus, now in the Egyptian Museum in Turin, depicts various sexual positions that Egyptians expected to enjoy after death. These weren't hidden away. They were part of the official religious iconography. Perhaps most striking is the archaeological evidence of genital preservation during mummification. Male mummies often had artificial phalluses constructed for them, while female mummies sometimes had artificial vulvas molded from resin. CT scans of royal mummies have revealed these intimate details. confirming that Egyptians believed sexual organs were essential equipment for the afterlife journey. For Egyptians, a sexless afterlife wasn't worth having. Their paradise included eternal youth, abundant food and drink, and unlimited sexual pleasure. And pharaohs like Tutankhamun were buried with massive collections of grave goods. These included items for sexual pleasure in the next world. If you think modern festivals get wild, they have nothing on the Festival of Min, ancient Egypt's most sexually explicit public celebration. Min was the god of fertility and sexual potency, typically depicted with an enormous erect phallus that he holds with one hand. His annual festival was essentially a massive public celebration of male sexual power. Temple reliefs at Luxor and Karnak show the Festival of Min in explicit detail. The centerpiece was a procession where priests carried a massive statue of Min with his erect phallus through the streets. This wasn't a small religious icon. It was a life-size divine statue with a phallus so large it required its own team of bearers. Imagine that rolling down your street during a holiday parade. As the Min statue processed through town, women would line the route and expose themselves to the god's statue. This wasn't considered obscene, it was a fertility ritual. By exposing themselves to Min's divine phallus, women hoped to absorb his procreative power and become pregnant. Unmarried women particularly participated, hoping to attract both divine blessing and very human husbands. One of the strangest aspects of the Min festival was the sacred role of lettuce. Yes, lettuce. Egyptians believed certain varieties of lettuce resembled an ejaculating phallus when broken. White milky liquid would emerge from the stem. During the festival, lettuce was offered to Min as a sacred food. Temple inscriptions show the god being presented with tall, erect lettuce plants as priests recite fertility prayers. The festival culminated with the release of 4 wild bulls, representing Min's virility, into the countryside. These bulls would mate with cows, symbolically spreading the god's fertility across the land. Meanwhile, the pharaoh would ritually cut a sheaf of grain, symbolizing his own sexual potency and its connection to agricultural abundance. Foreign visitors to Egypt were often shocked by the explicit nature of the Min festival. Greek historian Herodotus described it with barely concealed amazement, noting how different it was from more restrained Greek religious practices. But for Egyptians, there was nothing shameful about celebrating sexuality as a divine gift. The Min festival wasn't pornographic. It was a genuine religious celebration of the creative power that sustained their civilization. For all their enthusiasm about procreation, Egyptians were equally innovative when it came to preventing unwanted pregnancy. The Kahun Gynecological Papyrus and the Ebers Papyrus, dating from around 1850 BCE, contain some of history's earliest contraceptive recipes, and they're as bizarre as they are ingenious. The most infamous Egyptian contraceptive was crocodile dung, mixed with honey and sodium carbonate, and inserted into the vagina as a pessary. Before you dismiss this as completely insane, modern scientists have noted that crocodile dung is highly alkaline, which would indeed create a hostile environment for sperm. The physical barrier created by the pessary would also have some effectiveness. That said, the hygiene implications are horrifying by modern standards. Perhaps more effective was their use of acacia gum as a spermicide. Modern research has confirmed that acacia contains lactic acid, which is still used in some spermicidal jellies today. Egyptian women would mix acacia tips with honey and dates, soak a piece of lint in the mixture, and insert it vaginally. Chemical analysis of these ingredients shows they would indeed form a barrier that killed sperm, making this perhaps the world's first effective chemical contraceptive. For those seeking longer-term solutions, Egyptian medical texts recommend drinking a mixture of mashed pomegranate and beer for 3 to 4 days. Modern testing has shown that pomegranate seeds contain natural estrogen, which could potentially disrupt fertility. It wasn't the pill, but it was a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of plant-based hormonal effects. When contraception failed, Egyptians had recipes for releasing blocked menstruation, their euphemism for abortion. The Ebers Papyrus recommends a mixture of dates, onions, and the unidentified plant sia ground in beer. Other recipes included celery mixed with beer, or the application of heated honey and oil to the abdomen. While less reliable than modern methods, some of these mixtures contained plants with documented abortifacient properties. Egyptian women also used magical protection alongside these physical methods. Amulets shaped like the god Bez, protector of women and children, were worn to prevent unwanted pregnancy. Spells from the London and Leiden magical papyri include incantations to bind the womb against conception. What's most remarkable about Egyptian contraception isn't just the methods themselves, but the matter-of-fact way they're presented in medical texts. These weren't shameful secrets. They were standard medical procedures, taught to physicians and recorded in official documents. For a civilization so focused on fertility in their religion, they were remarkably practical about controlling reproduction in daily life. Pharaohs married their sisters long before Game of Thrones made it a plot point. Royal incest wasn't just permitted in ancient Egypt, it was actively encouraged, particularly during the Ptolemaic period. The Ptolemaic family tree doesn't branch. It circles back on itself like a royal Ouroboros. This practice began with divine precedent. In Egyptian mythology, gods frequently married their siblings. Osiris married his sister Isis. Their son Horus married Hathor, who was sometimes described as his mother. These divine family arrangements provided the template for royal marriages, allowing pharaohs to claim they were following the gods' example. The most infamous practitioner was Cleopatra VII. Yes, the Cleopatra. Before her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, she was married to her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. When he drowned during civil war, she promptly married her even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. This wasn't scandalous by Egyptian standards. It was traditional. In fact, Cleopatra's parents were likely siblings themselves. DNA analysis of royal mummies has confirmed these practices extended beyond the Ptolemies. Testing on Tutankhamun's mummy revealed his parents were brother and sister. His father, Akhenaten, married several of his daughters after the death of his primary wife, Nefertiti. These weren't secret arrangements. They were celebrated in official art and inscriptions. The political motivation behind royal incest was straightforward: keeping power within the family. By marrying his sister, a pharaoh ensured no outside family could claim royal connection. Sister wives were less likely to plot against their brother husbands because they shared the same family interests. It also preserved the divine bloodline, which Egyptians believed carried the essence of the gods. The genetic consequences were predictably severe. Tutankhamun's mummy shows multiple congenital defects, including a clubfoot and cleft palate. CT scans of other royal mummies show similar issues. The last generations of Ptolemies were particularly affected, with contemporary accounts describing physical abnormalities and mental instability. What's remarkable is how the Egyptians rationalized these obvious problems. Far from seeing birth defects as divine punishment, they interpreted them as marks of divine heritage, physical proof that the pharaohs weren't fully human. When Ptolemaic rulers appeared with bulging eyes and elongated skulls on official coinage, these weren't artistic mistakes. They were deliberate depictions of the family's distinctive features, presented as signs of their special status. Royal incest continued for over 3,000 years of Egyptian history, making it one of the longest-running social experiments in human genetics. The practice only ended when Rome conquered Egypt, bringing their own taboos against sibling marriage. The last pharaoh to marry a sibling was Cleopatra, making her the final link in a very twisted family chain. One of the most disturbing claims about ancient Egyptian sexuality comes from Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt around 450 BCE. In his work, The Histories, Herodotus makes a shocking assertion. Beautiful women weren't given to embalmers until 3 days after death, because there had been cases of necrophilia by the embalmers. They say that one man was caught having intercourse with the fresh corpse of a woman, and was reported by his colleague. This account has been debated by Egyptologists for centuries. Is it reliable evidence of an actual practice, or just sensationalized gossip from a foreign visitor? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Archaeological evidence does confirm that embalming was typically delayed for several days after death, but this had practical reasons. Bodies were first purified and prepared before the actual mummification began. This preparation included washing the body and removing internal organs, steps that would naturally occur before the embalmers received the corpse. However, Egyptian texts themselves suggest awareness of the taboo. The negative confession in the Book of the Dead, essentially a list of sins the deceased denies having committed, includes the line, "I have not had sexual relations with a corpse." This suggests necrophilia was recognized as a potential transgression, serious enough to be included among major sins like murder and theft. The professional ethics of embalmers were taken seriously in Egyptian society. They were priests of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, and were expected to maintain ritual purity. The embalming workshop, per Nefer, was a sacred space, and violations of its sanctity would have been considered both criminal and sacrilegious. What makes Herodotus's account plausible is the Egyptian obsession with bodily integrity after death. The entire mummification process was designed to preserve the body for eternity. Sexual violation would have been seen as a horrific desecration, threatening the deceased's afterlife journey. The 3-day waiting period might indeed have been a practical precaution against such violations. Whether Herodotus's account is literally true or exaggerated, it reveals something important about Egyptian attitudes. They recognized the potential for sexual attraction to the dead body and took steps to prevent it, suggesting a culture that acknowledged human sexual impulses, even taboo ones, and created practical safeguards against them. Ancient Egyptian sexuality was inseparable from their religion, politics, and daily life. Their practices might seem bizarre to modern eyes, but they reveal a culture that viewed sexuality as a natural, divine force essential to cosmic order. From creation myths to architectural symbolism, sexuality permeated every aspect of Egyptian civilization. While these accounts may seem shocking, they show how different cultures develop unique attitudes toward sexuality based on their environment, religion, and social structures. Egyptians lived in a harsh desert environment where fertility of the Nile, the soil, and the people meant survival. Their sexual practices and beliefs reflected this reality, celebrating and ritualizing the reproductive powers that sustained their world.